Pattaya City Expats Club is a non-profit social organisation and our speakers are volunteers. The club as such assumes no responsibility or liability for the professional reputation of or the quality of services provided by the speaker today.
Phil? Austin, okay. Up there in the east. Phil is the Deputy Asia Director for Human Rights Watch based in Bangkok, and he will talk about his organisation and what his organisation is and provide an overview of what it does. Phil has worked for the organisation for the past 10 years and oversees their work for Southeast Asia and the Korean Peninsula. Human Rights Watch is one of the world's best known international working groups on human rights research and advocacy, and does a hell of a lot of work, especially in Asia where it's very important. And I'd like to welcome, thank you, Phil.
Great. Thank you, Stuart. Gotta get the goggles on. Good morning. Can you all hear me? Yeah? Okay, good. That picture's a little bit too big. Good morning, I'm Phil Robertson. I'm the Deputy Asia Director of Human Rights Watch. There we go. Moving things around on the dice here. Okay, great, thank you. And I want to thank Ren Alexander right there, of course, and the leaders of the Pattaya City Expats Club for inviting me to speak to you today about our work about promoting and protecting human rights in Thailand and through Southeast Asia and around the world. And also for arranging to get me a flu shot. This is actually the first time I've ever had a flu shot in my life, so you can see how COVID-19 era changes everything. As I mentioned, I'm originally from the Boston area. I actually grew up looking at the ocean on Cape Cod. A lot of my friends say, why did you leave Cape Cod to come to Thailand? They just have never been here, obviously. And I've been living here in Thailand for 25 years. Most of that time has been in Bangkok, but I've also traveled to every province in the country. And I used to work on the Thai-Lao border back in the days when there were still refugee camps there. And that gives you an idea of how long ago that was. One of the fortunate things about living in rural areas of Thailand in the early 1990s, back when I had to actually get a bus from where I was living in Phayao to go to Chiang Rai, which was 96 kilometers away, to make an overseas phone call, is that there's not a lot of English language speakers around at that time. So I actually had to learn Thai pretty quickly, and it's probably one of the reasons I've stayed here for so long. I've actually worked in refugee camps, as I mentioned. I've worked in rural villages doing forestry and irrigation projects for Thai NGOs, worked with labor unions and industrial zones and migrant workers in all sorts of places of work, including in the fishing ports, similar to Samesan and some of these other infamous places where there's been a lot of human trafficking in the past. I actually worked for a number of years at the UN, so I got to meet with some ministers and others, and the last 10 years I've been working with Human Rights Watch. And as the number 2 person in the division and the only Human Rights Watch manager actually based in the Asia region, I oversee most of Southeast Asia, Japan, and the Korean Peninsula. And I also, for my sins, get to serve as our rapid response person for any sort of breaking news or urgent response that's needed. So I'm a little bit of the Johnny on the spot when things are happening in the region, because most of my colleagues are back in North America or Europe. And that's actually one of the reasons I've been so busy lately about the situation in Thailand, but also the upcoming elections in Myanmar, situation in Cambodia, and you name it. I mean, we can get into a lot of that during the question and answer session, and I'm also happy to talk at length about the situation in Thailand, which we've been following very closely. Now, the old saying is that a photo is worth 1,000 words. I don't have a photo. Well, I do have a photo, but it's not the photo we want to look at. It's actually the video that I want to show you. We have a short 6-minute video I'm going to show you about Human Rights Watch's work, and then I'll get into what we actually do. think we need sound, though.
Without paying a price, where they can worship as they wish and love who they choose.
Hold on.
Imagine a world.
I think we've got the. I think we've got the. I think we've got the music soundtrack along with the.
Where you can get justice whether you're rich or
Hold on. Can we start that over again?
Imagine what would happen if people fleeing violence were welcomed instead of feared. Imagine. This is the world we're fighting for. Human Rights Watch works in more than 100 countries on issues that affect all of us.
Our job is very simple. We protect people by speaking out. We defend their human rights.
He was locked up in a hut right here because he had a mental health condition.
Over the past couple of weeks, migrants have been stuck here in Tijuana, right next to the U.S. border, in what has become a humanitarian crisis as a result of the Trump administration's border policies.
We investigate abuses of power by corporations, institutions, armed groups, governments.
I've come to Guatemala to look for parents who've been deported by the Trump administration without their children. You know, we don't have any addresses necessarily for these people, so it's a question of getting to the communities, asking around, and trying to find them.
We've refined our method of investigating for over 40 years. And at the heart of it is talking to people, face to face.
And then if you could just draw all the buildings and the road, as much detail as you can.
We ask questions to establish the facts.
The most important questions are the most simple questions.
What happened to you? When did it happen?
What did you see? What did you hear?
What language were they speaking? What were they wearing?
And maybe most importantly, who did that to them?
Desde ahí me separaron. Desde se quedó ahí de Arizona y se quedó no sé dónde.
We interview dozens, sometimes hundreds of witnesses, and verify their accounts with additional evidence.
And we do that in many ways. We get documents, court records, autopsy reports, any type of secondary material that will help to build a story.
We are so well equipped today to get to the bottom of things, even in areas that we cannot reach physically.
We are here at the edge of a sinkhole that ISIS used to throw bodies of people it killed or executed. We've been here before, but this is the first time we come here with a drone. We're hoping that using drone technology this time, we will be able to get a clearer view of what lies at the bottom of this pit.
No, we've got something. There are the bodies.
Today, researchers are using an ever-growing toolbox to document violations, and that means we're using technology. Satellite imagery and drones, data analysis.
We double-check, we corroborate, and we continue to dig for the truth until we get it. Then we broadcast it to the world.
Sexual violence so common that it's become an ordinary part of life.
Many North Koreans told Human Rights Watch that when an official or a person in power picks a woman, she has no choice but to comply.
We bring the facts directly to the public.
Hay más de 2 millones de venezolanos que han salido del país huyendo de una crisis de derechos humanos y humanitaria que es dramática.
We join forces with activists and artists to reach millions of people.
Injustamente estás pidiendo que te olviden.
Acompáñanos, Human Rights Watch, a Ricardo Montaner, para decir por qué estamos todos juntos con Venezuela.
We use our investigations to pressure those in power to stop the abuses.
The Uzbek cotton industry and the government which controlled the industry forced hundreds of thousands of people to work as forced laborers in the field every year. We did an in-depth investigation, and after we put pressure on the World Bank that was funding some of the projects that used forced labor, literally hundreds of thousands of people were freed from forced labor overnight.
We never give up. We stay with an issue until we get results.
We worked for 8 years to get a treaty to ban landmines. We worked for 7 years to get a treaty to ban the use of child soldiers. And over 100,000 children have been freed from armed groups and armed forces.
What gives me real hope is the people. Despite all of the odds and the pain that they've gone through, they have hope. And that ignites my own hope.
I'm driven by the community of people around the world who are standing up, who believe in systems based on rule of law, respect, human rights, dignity.
This is the world we're fighting for.
So that gives you a very quick overview of some of the work that we do. As you see, we are a global organization. We're working in over 100 countries. You know, we're probably the second most famous human rights organization in the world. Did anybody want to guess who the most famous one is? Amnesty, yeah, Amnesty International. But what most people don't realize is that Amnesty is actually much larger in terms of budget, staff, and volunteers than Human Rights Watch. And when I say larger, I mean many times larger. We currently work in over 100 countries around the world. We have approximately 480 staff based in 83 cities in 52 countries. We have over 80 nationalities on our staff. So we're as diverse as the world we cover. And in the Asia region, we actually have formal offices established in Sydney, in Tokyo, and Seoul, and Hong Kong. In other parts of the world, we're in Brazil, the Congo, Moscow, cities across Europe, Toronto, major cities in the US, Beirut, and many other places. Altogether, there are 33 formally established offices of Human Rights Watch. But you can do the math on the numbers of our staff and realize that most of our offices just have a few people in them. And in many countries, like much of Southeast Asia, we just have one researcher for each country, doing it all. And so we're constantly working. People ask me, what is it like when you're working at Human Rights Watch? And, you know, and of course I answer, I talk about caring about the victims, I talk about trying to make a difference, I talk about standing up for people with nowhere else to turn, holding accountable the scum of the earth, dictators and rights abusers, soldiers and others. All those things are absolutely true. But the reality is that it's like being the manager of a 7-Eleven and living above the store, because I'm constantly on call. Something is always popping up that requires my attention, and so I, you know, forget it if I think I'm going to have a quiet weekend. The organizational motto that you saw on the T-shirts and some of the staff were wearing when they go to the field, tyranny has a witness, also means that we act, we respond in real time, and we don't let abuses go unanswered. And interestingly, you know, most people around the world think of the New Year holidays as a time when everybody is going to be able to be quiet and enjoy time off and spend time with your families and things like that. But actually, that's not usually the case for us, because many of the governments that we deal with, they recognize that in North America and Europe, particularly the Christmas and New Year holidays, is a time when many of the diplomats and governments are on leave. And so that's always the time to get up to doing various rights-abusing things that you hadn't done during the course of the year because you think you're going to get away with it. No one will be paying attention. We call it the sort of holiday surprise. And, you know, I'm always, when I'm getting to about the 22nd or the 23rd of December, I'm always sort of scanning around looking at the various governments I cover to see which one is going to try to pull the holiday surprise this year. Thailand particularly likes to do this. They're not always alone in that, but there's many others as well. And actually the first year that I worked for Human Rights Watch, in 2009, then Prime Minister Apisit Vejjativa and the Thai military hatched a plan to force back over 4,600 ethnic Hmong back to Laos, which was a clear violation of refugee protection principles. And I was actually in Boston at my parents' home, and you know, I had been told, like, I had just started work a week before, and they said, okay, well, you've done your orientation, even though you don't have any leave saved up, you know, we'll just say that you're working, you know, go read some stuff and enjoy the time with your parents. Well, needless to say, starting on December 23rd through Christmas Day and on the 26th, when the Thai military leaders finally shut down the mobile signal in the camps up in Phetchabun, beat up the camp leaders and pushed them and the rest into army trucks and drove them to the border, I was working the phones trying to stop that. You know, I was talking to media while my parents were, you know, saying, come on, we've got to open presents. And my relatives thought I was crazy until all of a sudden they heard me talking on national public radio and then reading about it in the New York Times. And they're like, oh, so that's what you do. Yeah, we're there. We're the witnesses. We're the ones who speak up. And then that incident, we had the UN Secretary General weigh in, we had the US Secretary of State, we had the head of the European Commission. And Thailand realized that actually the watchmen had not been sleeping. And that pressure actually enabled us to get a better outcome a year later when many of those Hmong who had been forced out had slipped back into Thailand, and we were finally able to get them resettled to third countries as refugees. Now our office, our headquarters, is actually based in New York. We're actually in the Empire State Building. So one of the benefits of working for Human Rights Watch is we get a free ticket to the top of the building. We're actually the biggest tenant in the building, and you know, when we, you know, tell people we're at the Empire State Building, people think that, oh, that must be really luxurious. That must be really amazing. And you know, the lobby and the art is fantastic. But everybody from New York can tell you that that building was built in 1928. It's a marvel. It's built of steel and concrete long before the dawn of modern lightweight building construction. But the rents are cheap because it's an old building. And I can tell you from experience that when the winter storms blow across Manhattan, it's a little bit unnerving to be on the 34th floor and hear the building creaking like an old ship. So, you know, just like the building's like Human Rights Watch, it bends, but it never breaks. So our organization is broken up into regional divisions and thematic divisions. That means I'm part of one of the regional divisions, the Asia Pacific division, but there's a Latin America and the Caribbean division, there's an Africa division, there's a division that works on Europe and Central Asia, and there's a Middle East and North Africa division. And also, needless to say, there's also a United States division. A lot of people are like saying to us, you know, when I'm dealing with Malaysia or I'm dealing with Thailand or something like that, the thing they like to throw back at us is they say, why are you giving us a hard time out here in Thailand and Malaysia? Why don't you take care of your own problems back at home? Why don't you deal with all the problems in the United States and the rights abuses that are happening there? And I'm happy to say that we do, because actually our biggest division is the one working on human rights issues in North America. So, but we also have what we call thematic divisions. And those thematic divisions are people who have specific expertise in certain areas of human rights. So it could be refugees. We have a business and human rights division. We have a women rights division. We have a child rights division. We have a division on arms that works on issues of landmines and other sorts of weapons that should be outlawed. We have an LGBT rights division and others as well. So we have a mixture of geographic and thematic expertise that we mix together on a regular basis. So when I'm doing something about we're doing something in Asia about LGBT rights, we need to ask the LGBT division, get their input. But when the LGBT rights wants to do something about Asia, they have to ask us. And so there's a sort of interweaving, a constant consultation to make sure that we get it right. Now, what does Human Rights Watch do? What is our core mission? It's really quite simple. And this thing gets misconstrued by the governments all the time. Human Rights Watch exists to uphold core international human rights treaties adopted by the member states of the UN and overseen by UN Human Rights Mechanism at the UN Human Rights Council and by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. So everything we do is based on what's in the actual human rights treaties that most of the nations of the world have ratified. Now, of course, they ratify things and then they conveniently forget that they're required to implement them as well. And everything we do is compared against that yardstick of human rights. And if it doesn't involve human rights, then it's outside our mandate. We don't comment on it. So, for instance, I'll give you an example. We do a lot of work on Burma. We do a tremendous amount of work on Burma. You know, we had decades of a brutal military dictatorship that regularly abused rights. Now we have a quasi-democratic country which still has major problems. But one of the big issues in Burma is the divides between the central government and the army, which are primarily run by ethnic Burmans, and the various ethnic minorities, the Karen, the Shan, the Kachin, the Mon, the Rakhine, Rohingya, and others. You know, Burma is a country with one of the longest civil wars in the world. Some of the groups like the Karen have been fighting since 1949. But there is no actual right to peace. So we don't talk about peace negotiations. We don't talk about ceasefires. We don't talk about those other central issues in Burma because it's outside of the specific human rights mandate that we do. And we don't involve we don't involve ourselves in partisan politics. You know, how we view a government depends on whether it respects human rights or not. We don't take a side in electoral politics and party politics. You know, we've been accused in the past, like, you know, some of the people don't like us in Thailand say you're supporting this political party. You know, the Prime Minister Hun Sen in Cambodia will say, oh, you're supporting the opposition party, which has been banned. We don't. We support the issues of human rights. Similarly, as we saw here, when President Trump separates the children of migrants from parents at the U.S.-Mexico border, and we've recently learned that the U.S. now has over 500 children locked up for whom they cannot find their parents. Those parents were deported sometime in the past and are somewhere in Latin America, and they can't figure out how to put the kids and the parents back together. You know, we strongly criticize what has actually been done, that actual human rights abuse. But we wouldn't say, because of that, vote for this party, that party. That's not what we do. Importantly also, it's Human Rights Watch, we don't take any money from any government. We decided very early on that part of our credibility is our total independence from governments. We don't want to be beholden to them in any way. And we similarly do not accept money from companies or corporations, or for people working in business sectors where we are doing research and advocating for rights. So that means we don't take any money from any of the Silicon Valley bigwigs, because we're working on issues related to social media, privacy, tech, and other things. We're not going to take money, for instance, from someone who's a senior person at Facebook or Google, because that would create for us a potential conflict of interest if we are in fact attacking them. And we're not going to do that. Our credibility is more important than their money. And of course, we don't take any money from people involved in rights abusing industries like mining companies, oil companies, forestry companies, and others. Let me say as a side, that it's sometimes rather strange and funny that many of these government or global elites can't really seem to realize that we don't want their money and would never under any circumstances take their money. For example, the current defense minister of Indonesia is a truly odious rights-abusing man named General Prabowo Subianto. You may recognize his name because he ran for Indonesian president two times, and lost both times to Jokowi, who's the current office holder. What people tend to forget is that this guy used to be a Kopassus, or a special commando soldier, and he was married to President Suharto's daughter. And he did some pretty atrocious things, including killing civilians in East Timor. And in 1998, he was involved in the disappearance of 13 student activists, all believed now to have been executed that year. This was during the year of the foment against Suharto that ultimately forced Suharto to resign, to stand down. And he was subsequently discharged from the Indonesian army dishonorably, and he reinvented himself as a businessman who's now actually worth over 150 million US dollars. How he made that money, we don't want to know. But this is the sort of the guy who we believe belongs in prison somewhere, not leading a government, much less a ministry. Yet when he was planning his first run for election for president in 2009, he knew he had a human rights problem. So he comes to Human Rights Watch and offers us to give us a huge donation. How much do you want? He's going to offer us millions of dollars. I kid you not. And as you guess, we were not polite in refusing him. But this is the way that these authoritarians think, that they have the money, they have the power, and anybody can be bought. They are surprised to run into people with principles who are prepared to call them out on their rights abuses now in the future, and who are not willing to step aside or stand down. I say in Thai, we got my bloy, which means we bite and we don't let go. And we su my toy, we fight and we never retreat. We do our research in the field, and as I mentioned, usually it's one person, one country, but sometimes with larger teams in emergency situations, like when we were dealing with the acts of genocide against the Rohingya in Western Burma in 2017. We put our people in the field to do the work. We operate with partners, lawyers, NGO people, journalists, and we have a lot of real subject matter and country specialists who help us out. We have a huge social media presence. That's part of our effort to get the word out. So we have over 4 million followers on Twitter, over 2 million followers on Facebook. And our approach actually is best explained by our theory of change, which goes by the initials IEC. I stands for investigate, E stands for expose, C stands for change. So we hire world-class investigators to get to the bottom of the issues, get the testimony of the human rights abusers that you see here. And if you see and read one of our human rights report, you'll see the witness testimony is right up front, because we actually believe often the best person to tell the story is the person who actually suffered the abuses. We want their voices up front. We want to put a human face on these human rights issues, on these human rights abuses, so that it's quite clear what is happening and who it's being done to, and that these people have an opportunity to tell their story. But of course, we need to cross-check everything against other sources. We cannot take anything for granted. The reality is that there are many governments around the world who really don't like that we expose their abuses, and they would like nothing better to catch us out making a mistake. So we're double and triple careful to make sure that everything is verified. And if something cannot be verified, well, that information is not going to go into the report. We will take it out. It doesn't matter how strong it is or salacious it is, how the media would love it. If we cannot prove it, we're not going to put it in. Again, because our reputation is the thing that really leads the work that we do. The fact that we were able to get government to listen to us, the fact that we were able to get media to listen to us, is in part because we are considered to be credible, and that we do the extra work to make sure that we don't mess anything up. And if we do mess something up, and of course everybody does, we have a corrections page, and we will put it right out there that we made a mistake, we didn't get this right, and this is right there. You know, this is why I find it so funny and rather pathetic that when countries like Singapore, which has passed a very damaging and so-called anti-fake news law, you know, they accused us. We wrote a whole report about lack of freedom of expression in that country. They accused us of being involved in fake news. But the thing is, they never provided any evidence. They never provided anything like that. They basically used the fact that they are Singapore to basically suggest that their opinion is the only opinion that matters. And actually, when it comes to the anti-fake news law, that's true. They've written a law which says that a minister can determine that whatever is up online about Singapore, that it is either true or false. And if it is false, they can apply the law and say that if you don't take it down, you will face $100,000 fines and possible prison term. So, I mean, this is where, you know, governments, you know, they don't, if they can't argue on the basis of facts, they argue on the basis of power. And, you know, they have no idea about what they're talking about when they say that we engage in fake news, because they have no idea about the sort of fact-checking that went into that report. You know, they're just slinging mud because they don't like what we report about them. An investigation is not just about interviewing. But there's, as you saw, there's issues of drones, satellite photos, going to hospitals, going to morgues. Actually, fascinating case was when Muammar Gaddafi's government fell, we were able to get in there right at the very start of when the people were getting into that building, and we were able to get his files. So we got a lot of files from Muammar Gaddafi's intelligence agencies about all the things they had been doing all over the world, because we were able to get there first. We were also able to get there and see all these various different surface-to-air missiles sort of lying around in unguarded warehouses, and like call people and say, you know, I know you're worried about surface-to-air missiles. Maybe you should go and secure that warehouse that we just saw that has crates and crates of them, and the guards left 2 days ago. So, I mean, we get in there and see these things, and we in there report them. So, give you an example from Burma. In October 2016, there was a number of Burma army attacks against the Rohingya in Western Burma, and the government was actually denying that anything was happening. And what we were able to do is we were able to publish satellite photos of villages on fire and do sort of before and after images. Here's the image of the village a year ago. Here's what it's looking like now. And the CNN and others picked up it, and they put a slider bar between the two photos so you could see back and forth like that. And just about every TV broadcaster around the globe wanted those photos, in part because we were able to get clear evidence that the government, which was denying that anything was happening, was lying. Something was clearly happening. At that original point, we didn't say what was happening because we didn't know yet. We knew that these villages were on fire. We knew there were allegations that the military had done it. But we didn't have anybody in the villages. We weren't able to get that information at that point. So then we had to dig deeper. And that's where we, for instance, reached out to people by phone, where we were able to get various images and video from people on the ground that they sent to us that we were able to verify with timestamps and other tech means. And over a period of time, we're able to build a case that, in fact, it was the military that was torching these villages. It wasn't the Rohingya people burning their own villages, as the government was trying to claim. They were trying to say, oh yeah, they're burning their villages because they know you Westerners will be interested in them more if they burnt down everything they own. I mean, this is Burma government logic. You know, we produced reports, press releases, op-eds, multimedia videos, and shorts. Once we have the information, there's so many ways for us to get it out. And that is when we do what we call the exposure. You know, we expose governments and businesses and others in what is classically known as the name and shame approach. This is something that governments don't like, and that's why obviously we're not popular with them. They don't like being called out for publicly violating rights. But the reality is that even the most hard-headed governments are not going to turn around and claim like, hey, yeah, we were just out there violating rights and it was great. That's not the way the game works. They play the game that we didn't do it. And so it becomes almost a game of gotcha. We have to catch them at it. And this is why name and shame works, because in part, they don't want to be called up. They don't want to be seen as separate from the norm of rights-respecting governments. They don't want to be classified with Assad in Syria, or Gaddafi in Libya, or some of the worst abusers that you can imagine. They don't want that. So there's an impetus for the governments that if we are able to call them out, if we are able to show that we have the goods, that they will change their behavior. They try to play defense. They try to claim we got it wrong. A lot of times they'll attack us saying, Human Rights Watch is not fair. Human Rights Watch is biased. And again, we have ways of responding to that. But the reality is that we do have credibility with other governments. So, when we call up the French government, we call up the UK government, the US government, and others, and say we want to talk about a human rights situation in Myanmar, they want to talk to us because we probably have information that they want to see. And that's the reality of it. And we're very good at reaching out to media. Many of our people are former journalists. In some ways, what we do can be compared to investigative journalism, except we produce a much longer report. We're making the time to do the research and come up with a story. And that's the thing that the governments are concerned about, that we have the capacity also, when we get the goods, when we get the information about what they've been doing, to go very loud, very quickly, around the globe, in many cases, and demand the government respond and fix the problems we've identified. That is, in some ways, our key card, is that we can make a lot of noise, and that's what we do. We are able, as you saw from that video, to present issues in a very compelling way to demand action be taken. And the change part of our theory, really, is that we have in all of our reports, all of our work, written in recommendations for what we want to see done. Usually these focus on governments, but usually we will actually make recommendations to whoever we think can influence a situation in a particular way. Sometimes it's donor agencies, sometimes it's other governments, sometimes it's UN agencies, sometimes it's companies. Whoever we think is either can play a positive role or who is playing a negative role that they need to stop, we will issue recommendations to. And we will try to do then global advocacy not only at the multilateral level with UN agencies, but also at areas like government to government. Now, I could talk a lot about work we do on international justice mechanisms, investigations at the International Court of Justice, where we were involved in the effort by the Gambia, behind the scenes, frankly, involved in the efforts by the Gambia to take Myanmar to the International Court of Justice on the crime of genocide. Some of the things we've been doing in the International Criminal Court, working, trying to get investigations going in Burma, Sri Lanka, North Korea. But, I think it'd probably be better at this point to move towards questions. I would say, just briefly about Thailand, allowing me to come and speak to you all, and I look forward to whatever questions you have.
Thank you, Phil. And it's a hell of a job you've got. I was alerted maybe 3 or 4 years ago now to a crisis happening at Savannah-Bom Airport. A young Saudi lady was being dragged back onto the plane by either airport staff or airline staff. And Phil was on the job, and possibly he saved her life. She might have lost her life if she was dragged back onto the plane, sent back home. She's now safely living in Canada. And this is a thin end of a edge of a wedge, which is helping to change attitudes to imprisonment of women in a lot of countries around the world. So thank you, Phil. We got any questions?
Thank you. Hello, Phil. Thank you for coming today. A couple of weeks back, I just happened to be flicking through the television and I came across France 24. You were on a three-person panel trying not to answer the questions that they were asking you. I've lived here a long time and I understand what we can't talk about. But the international interviewers don't know these rules. You're a master at getting over what you want to say without saying what you shouldn't say. Are you trained in this, or is it just a skill that you picked up?
Thanks. No, I was actually trying to do that at that interview.
I worked in Malaysia, I worked in Philippines, many countries, and human rights there are being trampled upon, as you said. I've seen people being whipped around if they don't cooperate. In prison, the women are raped. It's absolutely atrocious. So that's one part of the thing. I'm from Germany. In Germany, we have a very liberal law as far as asylum or human rights is concerned. And since 2015, we've taken in close to 4 million refugees. Now, initially, the German public was very, very open-minded and very generous and received these people with open heart. We have now reached a phase where the country is deeply polarized. Many people say, oh, these people do not integrate, they have no qualifications, they cannot write, they cannot read. So it is extremely complicated now, and the German government has one hell of a problem containing that at the moment. The borders are still open, we still get thousands of people every month coming into Germany, and the German asylum law is very generous, very liberal. You just throw your passport away, say I'm from Syria or I'm from North Africa, and they let you in, no problems. And Germany is so attractive now because they have so tremendous social benefits. It is really a pull factor, and we're getting more and more people coming in. And the German government at the moment pays between 25 and 30 billion euros a year to maintain these refugees in Germany. So as you can imagine, that is causing a hell of a problem, because a lot of German people say, that's taxpayers' money, that's our money, you know. So it is extremely difficult and complicated. But naturally, we want to help if we can, but we have 70 million Africans now say they all want to come to Europe. Where the hell are you going to take them? Huh? How are you going to support them? It's going to be a tremendous challenge, very, very difficult. And as you said, money is the key to the whole thing. Naturally, we have a tremendous shortage of flats and places even for the German people to live. And we get these people coming in here, they have no place to live. They live in sheds. Sorry? Sorry, that's not a, okay. Sorry, anyway, just to summarize, that's it.
What to do about it?
Okay.
What to do about it? Yeah. Well, I mean, this is a global crisis. There's a global crisis of refugees. There are more refugees and asylum seekers in the world than there's ever been. Okay, and this is like even after like World War II, you know, when they basically tore up Europe and people were displaced all over the region. So this is a problem. I mean, and this is where, you know, countries like Germany, who have taken a very progressive approach in upholding refugee protections, which we support. You know, I mean, you have a backlash because people feel victimized, that they're being taken advantage of. And so, I mean, one of the big issues in Europe, of course, is how does Europe deal with these issues and sort of break the lock that some of the other governments are having on a wider policy of, for instance, receiving refugees or supporting refugees. I mean, let's be very direct about it. I mean, I don't know why Hungary is still part of the EU under Viktor Orban. They should kick him out. You know, the reality is that they're not complying with the sort of central EU edicts on human rights and other things like that. And if they're not willing to play by the rules, I mean, we've argued actually, well, we've argued for an intermediary step, which is suspend their veto the EU Council. And basically what has happened is certain governments are blocking progress on a whole range of issues at the EU. And this is where, you know, I mean, so if I was Angela Merkel, I would be basically rallying other countries in the EU to basically take action against the people who are causing problems for a larger policy that would spread the burden of the refugee issue in Europe. You know, the other side of it is, of course, that there are a lot of people in these groups who are educated, who are prepared to make a significant contribution to the societies. I'm originally from the U.S., and so, I mean, we have seen, before the Trump administration, the United States was consistently taking more refugees than any other country in the world. And the reality is, it works out very well. You have a lot of people who have done amazing jobs. And we even have now a woman who is from Somalia, who's a congressperson. So, I mean, my view about it is immigration is by and large a good thing, and refugee status and acceptance of refugees is a good thing. There is also, I would say, another thing, that a lot of times governments forget that actually people have to prove refugee status. So there's an assumption that anybody shows up and says I'm a refugee automatically becomes a refugee. In fact, the reality is that there is a refugee status determination process where people have to prove their bona fides. They have to prove what they're saying is true. They have to show evidence. And that's the process that has been set up by the UN. And a lot of times the governments at the same time, like, and this is the classic case in, for instance, Australia. Australia says we don't want anybody coming by boats. None of these people are asylum seekers. But then they weren't prepared to do the necessary work to assess who's a refugee and who's not. So you had bias systems that were basically turning people back. It's a difficult issue. This is actually, you know, the sort of cutting edge of globalization, where with boat travel, air travel, and things like that, we're increasingly breaking down the nation state. The nation state is being, before COVID, really sort of eroded by international travel. And you know, why? I mean, you know, 50 years ago, the idea like someone like myself, American citizen, would live 25 years of my life in Thailand was basically unimaginable. It's changed a lot. And so, I mean, we're in a bump in the road now. Germany has done the right thing here. They need to get support from the EU, and they need to do the work that they need to do to remove the blockages that are making that impossible.
Well, thank you very much, Phil. That's excellent talk. We appreciate it. And I'd just like to present you with our usual thank you plaque for being a speaker today at Patio City Expats Club.
Thank you very much. That's great. Appreciate it very much. I'll hang around if people have more questions.
Thank you.